So that's a basic narrative. I was here and I'm trying to go there. And so if you're asking your kindergarten kid what they did today at school and teaching them to tell a story, they might say, well, I was at home and then mom took me to kindergarten. It's like not a very exciting story, but it's a story. And then a little more exciting story might be, I was at home, my mom took me to school, and on the way there a big dog ran up to the fence and barked at me. And the right question that would follow that story is, okay, what did you do? And that's a real story because the kid says, well look, I was in this frame of reference and I was aiming at goal A, B actually, I was aiming at point B, and while I was aiming at point B and acting out the processes that would lead me there, something unexpected happened. That's a story. And then you say, well, what did you do? And the kid might say, well, you know, I was really scared and I hid behind mom. Or, so that would be one response. And we still went to kindergarten and I was okay. It's pretty good, pretty good. Or the kid might say, well, I wasn't scared at all because I know that if you stand up to dogs, they usually leave you alone. And we went to kindergarten and that was okay. And, you know, the kid is trying to tell, really, they're trying to tell a little hero story. And if they're successful in the encounter with the thing that's unknown, then they triumph as a consequence of their encounter with the unexpected, and poof, you know, that's successful adaptation. You pat them on the head and you say, yeah, that's really good. And they kind of smile and, you know, you're teaching them how to comprehend their existence in a narrative structure, and you're also teaching them what that narrative structure should be. So this is like a meta-narrative, and the meta-narrative says you were going from point A to point B, that's the oval on the left, and then something completely bizarre happened, like I was betrayed. And then I was in this terrible place for quite a long period of time, a chaotic place, but I learned a bunch, and I put myself back together, and I'm a wiser person as a consequence of the encounter. Right? Everyone knows that story. And that's paradise, paradise lost, paradise regained. It's a cultural meta-narrative. And it's a story that it's a human story. It's an apocalyptic story. That's why everybody's always all apocalyptic about everything, right? Apocalypse of the week. We're going to run out of oil. We're going to run out of gas. There's too much carbon dioxide. The Chinese are going to take over the world. We're ruining the ecology. The ocean's running out of fish. You know, the world is getting too hot. It was getting too cold in 1970 when I was about your age. It's like apocalypse of the week. Why? Because things fall apart. And because they can fall apart completely, and they often do. And so everyone's always on the alert for like the next potential apocalypse, and it's no wonder. You know, it's a permanent characteristic of life that things can radically fall apart. Now, luckily, it's a permanent characteristic of life that they can actually also radically come back together. And it turns out that whether or not they radically come together depends to some degree on how you choose to act when they fall apart. Pure experience is the name which I give to the original flux of life before reflection has categorized it. Only newborn babes and persons in semi-coma from sleep, drugs, illnesses, or blows can have an experience pure in the literal sense of a that which is not yet any definite what? Potential. Potential. Because you might think, well, what's the world made of? It's made out of actuality, right? But that's not how you act. You act as if the world's made out of potential, and you interact with that potential. And what James is saying is that there are times when you experience something that's akin to relatively pure potential. And then you might ask yourself whether or not potential is real, which is a really interesting question. But I can say, regardless of how you answer that question, you act as if it's real. And you'll also feel guilty if someone that you love comes up to you and says, you're not living up to your potential. It's like, what the hell does that mean? What does it mean? It means you're not becoming that which you could be. Well, what is that? It's like, you know, we're materialists. How are we going to measure that? You can't touch it, you can't taste it, you can't see it, you can't measure it, right? But nonetheless, it's like the substance of being. And being is potential as well as actuality. And we're grappling always with the potential. And so that's what James is talking about, pure potential. I like to think of it as latent information. Eliade says, now as we know for archaic and traditional cultures, the symbolic return to chaos is equivalent to preparing a new creation. So the death of your current state of being can be the preparation for a new being. Now, one of the things the psychoanalysts say, and this is implicit in Eliade's discussion of the shamanic transformation, is if you do this voluntarily, you have a much better chance of doing it successfully. So the rule is, well, if you go out to hunt for a dragon and you're in pretty good shape while you're doing it and you're all prepared, then the damn thing might not eat you. But if you're lying in bed and you're covered with cheesy dust and you're hungover from 3 days worth of drinking, then the dragon will just eat you, and it's probably a good thing for everyone that it did. So the point is, be prepared, and part of the way that you're prepared is by being awake and having the many sources of power that are at your fingertips, that are part of your biological and cultural inheritance at the ready, so that you can respond. All right, well, I'll tell you this little story for 1 minute. So, I had a 5-year-old nephew, and he was having night terrors, so he'd wake up at night screaming. It happened a lot, and there was some trouble in his family at that point. His parents ended up getting divorced, but anyways, he'd wake up screaming. And so, he also was running around during the day with a little night hat on, and like a plastic sword, and so he was like Joe Knight, and then when he went to bed, he had the little night hat by him, and also the sword. And so one night when I was there, he had one of these night terrors, and so I was there that morning, and I said, well, did you dream anything? And this is what he said. Dwarf-like beak creatures who came up to his knees, he was out in a field, and they were like, so these little things about this big, they had no arms, they just had a big head that was a beak, and they were jumping at him with the beak and like chomping him, and on the top of their head, it was all hairy and greasy, and on the top of their head, they had a cross shaved in it. So it was like, everybody shut up at that breakfast, I could tell. It's like, oh, that's what's happening. It's no wonder you're screaming. And then, so he was fighting away with these things, and they're jumping on him, but the problem was, he said there was a dragon in the background, and what was happening was the dragon was breathing out fire all the time, and the fire and the smoke were turning into these dwarfed, little dwarf bird things that were biting him. And it's like perfect, right? It's such a perfect representation. He can't fight off any one problem because it's sort of pointless, because there's something in the background generating problems like mad. It's like a hydra. Cut off one head, 7 more grow. So I said, what could you do about that? Which is a leading question, right? Because it implies that he could do something about that. So then he said, I would take my dad and we would go after the dragon. I'd jump on his head and poke its eyes out with my sword, and then I'd go down its belly to where the fire comes out, and I'd carve out a piece of the firebox and I'd make a shield out of it. And I thought, yes! That's right! So, and one of the things that's very interesting, and I know this is hard to believe, but it's absolutely true, he did not have any night terrors after that. It was extra cool. And it was the leading question. It's because he's like victim, right? It's like, oh my God, horrible bird-headed biting things, which is pretty good. It's like, that's what the world's like. And then there's something in the background generating these things. What do? You go to the source of the trouble, and you find something that shields yourself from it in the encounter. Brilliant. All right.